Great turnout. I love that. Welcome, everybody. My name is Steve Hammer. I'm the manager of the climate policy team, and I'm really excited that we get such great turnout for these this whole series. For those of you who were not at the first session a few weeks ago, this is an attempt by the PPCR program, the Pilot Program for Climate Resilience, to really begin to share information that's coming out of some of the projects that we're seeing on the ground, both from the pre-existing countries, but also the 10 new countries, to flag some issues that they are self-identifying as important, and to give us an opportunity to talk about them. The issue of urban resilience is one that has been prominent in the bank forever. It's just we didn't always have it, a name for it like that. And even today, we're still in a situation where we're still trying to fully grapple with how do we characterize these issues, what is the scope of these issues, how broadly do we define this notion of resilience. Is it climate only? Is it climate and disaster? Is it go beyond that? These are issues that are not just facing the bank, but lots of organizations around the world are really taking these on and trying to understand whether there are issues that in many ways share many of the same characteristics in terms of shocks or stresses that may create a very difficult environment in which for cities to progress or countries to progress. And so perhaps we should be including some of those in the resilience conversation as well. And that clearly has driven some of what the bank has been trying to do on urban resilience over the last several years. We'll hear a bit of that history today and where we're going with several of our speakers. Again, the purpose of this session is to highlight a few issues that we're seeing as prominent in the agendas of several of the PPCR member countries. Also to begin to create an environment where we can systematically meet and talk about these things. There are many communities of practice that focus on resilience issues in different ways. This is a different forum to continue that conversation or advance that conversation. Again, so I'm really pleased that you're here. And I'm pleased, just looking around the room, that we have representation from such a broad array of practices folks who are going to bring very different perspectives to this issue. So thank you again for coming. In terms of how today's going to work, we're going to have a series of speakers, some from within the bank, but we've also got a former bank colleague who's now at the Inter-American Development Bank. We'll talk about how they're approaching some of this. We'll start off with Joe Leitman, who's the lead DRM specialist and heads up the Urban Resilience Initiative for GFDRR. We'll then hear from Horacio Terraza from IDB, who is been doing work on, he's a lead water and sanitation specialist, but has also been very active in the resilience space and has been actively engaged in their flagship Cities Initiative, which tries to, again, take a very broad brush approach to thinking about what you need to do to support cities in the LAC region. We'll then wrap up with some commentary from Niels Holmes-Nielsen, who's the global lead for resilience and disaster risk management at GSER. Niels is spearheading the work on urban resilience and taking some of the work that was begun within SIR over the last several years and grow it. And there's been some very exciting progress made with the City Strength Initiative and some of the other initiatives that he's been leading that is now being rolled out in a variety of countries. And I think there will be some really interesting things to share about that. So we've got a lot to cover. You don't want to hear from me anymore, so we'll have Joe present first. And Joe, I think we're trying to keep to a fairly rigid time frame, so if you could do it in about 10 to 12 minutes, then we'll have a few questions, and then we can move on to the other speakers, and we'll try and have a bigger Q&A at the end. But Joe, if you could please take it away.
Thanks, Steve. I think I sent in 28 slides, and I was told, that's not going to work. Cut it down to 7. So we compromised with 8. So let's go with that. First, thanks to Content and PPCR for hosting this. I really think from the turnout that we see here, the diversity of people, that this is an idea whose time has come. And so I want to talk a little bit about definitions to get us more or less on the same page about what is urban resilience, what do we cover, and then go into some of the reasons why we want to bother about it. And I think that was in the title of the event itself, why development experts can't afford to ignore this issue. Then go into a little bit about a missing piece of the puzzle in a lot of the literature and conversation on urban resilience, which is a lack of focus on the urban poor. And then get into a bit about why the World Bank has a very strong comparative advantage to help to lead this agenda. And then finally end with a few next steps where I think we could go to really take this to the next level. So definitions. First, there is no commonly accepted definition of urban resilience. But I think that this very simple one about being able to adapt to changing conditions, respond to shocks and stresses, while continuing to serve the urban population is a reasonable definition. Some people call it bouncing back better. There's a build back better philosophy in where I work on reconstruction, and there's a bouncing back better point of view as well. Now, this focus today is on climate resilience, but I'd like to argue that that's just one piece of the puzzle. When you go to cities and you talk to mayors and you talk to community leaders and you ask them about their problems and you say, hey, I'm here to help you with resilience, but I'm only going to address the climate-related part. They're going, well, thanks a lot, but I have a whole range of problems. And I think this categorization really reflects that range of hazards that urban residents face. There are natural problems, and I think that's where the climate risks come in, along with other natural hazards and health-related problems. There are also anthropogenic or man-made or technological issues that have to do with accidents and fires and, in fact, breakdowns of urban systems when your energy grid goes out or when your water supply system is busted or polluted. You have shocks and stresses that you have to respond to. And then there are a whole range of socioeconomic or political issues that affect the way that a city operates. So when we think about resilience, we really have to take this full universe of shocks and stresses into account. That's a big agenda, and we're not always authorized to work on some of these problems, like labor unrest. But I have a way out, and I'll get to that at the end. So why bother about this? Why is this imperative? Why is this the next big thing, or at least one of them, I think, for us in the development community? First, it has to do with rapid urbanization and where urbanization is occurring, with 90% of urban growth globally expected in Africa and primarily in South Asia. This is leading to a concentration of poverty, at least the head count, in cities, and it's also leading to a concentration of economic activity in cities. This means that more people and more assets are exposed to risks. And so we're expecting quite large losses moving forward. Just from natural hazards in the next year or two, we think it's going to be over $300 billion. And if you look at some of Stefan Halgat's calculations, the sea level rise for coastal cities could result in damages and losses of $1 trillion plus by mid-century. So there's a lot at stake that we need to be worried about. Again, a lot of money going into cities in terms of investment, and that capital is at risk from the various shocks and stresses that were in that initial table. So the bottom line here is there's increased exposure not only in cities, but also globally when we talk about the supply chain. Where is this a photo of? Thailand, right. So the floods that disrupted the global supply chain, it's happened in a range of places around the world. So the risk is not just local, it goes beyond borders. I think that we've got an opportunity looking forward because of the urbanization yet to come to build resilience into not only our economies, but the structures of our cities. So with 1 billion houses yet to be built, think of what we could do if they were more resistant to the threats of climate. With 60% of the urbanized area yet to be built, think what we could do with smarter construction techniques and spatial planning. And we have finally the opportunity to learn from the good and bad experiences of other cities around the world, and in the next 2 to 3 decades, take advantage of that to make a real change in building resilience in urban areas. Now, we recognize the importance of urban resilience, but a lot of the literature focuses more generally on cities and doesn't focus on the threats facing low-income communities in cities. And why do they face a disproportionate amount of threat? First of all, a lot of poor people, as we know, settle in risky areas, just because that's how the real estate market works, and often that land is not protected or constrained in its use. So that immediately exposes low-income settlements to risk. Second, poor families have less of an ability to cope with shocks and stresses. And I'll go back to Bangkok for an example of that. In the flooding that we saw a picture of, high-income communities could afford pumps, high-volume pumps, that sucked the water out of their community and dumped it into poor communities. So it exacerbated the problem, and they had little ability to cope with that flooding. And then finally, many poor communities in many countries have less access to both the pre-risk or pre-shock assistance and the support that comes afterwards. So for these 3 reasons, I think that we really need to refocus this urban resilience agenda on issues facing the poor. Okay, why are we going to lead this? With you guys. So the bank has such a rich history of experience in a number of the key areas that we need to be concerned about. Urban development lending since the mid-1970s, DRM work, and we are the bank for reconstruction, right? So that's been since the beginning. And then a massive amount of work on climate change. So we bring all of that knowledge and experience to bear. Then we have a mandate to address that missing piece of the puzzle on the urban poor. And we can do that increasingly through the resources that we must spend in this area. We've got the mandate to increase our climate finance, and some of that can go to cities. And then we've got this global capacity in terms of staffing, knowledge base, and our convening power. We've got, thanks to the reorganization, whether you like it or not, we've got a capacity to meet the resilience challenge through the group that constitutes GSOAR and other internal actors that we can mobilize. IFC is doing a lot of work on the resilience of buildings and investing in in smart and safe buildings. And we have colleagues in other GTs that need to be part of this agenda. We also have to reach out to other partners, and I'll get to that in a second. So we're starting to see real money going into this agenda. We've got a project in Turkey that is closing now, but we've got 3 new big investments that represent the current or emerging thinking about urban resilience, and they even include it in the title. My favorite is BURP, which is the Bangladesh Urban Resilience Program, though I think Mark may have renamed it more recently.
He did it on purpose.
And we have work going on in Africa in a couple of cities, in Addis, in the capital cities of Ethiopia, and more recently in greater metropolitan Accra on urban resilience. And, you know, to be honest, some of this is driven by disasters. There was a terrible disaster, a flood and an explosion in Accra that really riveted people's attention on the need to better deal with urban risks. Then we have activities that are and will support the portfolio and help it to grow. Niels and colleagues are heading up the City Resilience Program, which really seeks to provide better access to financing cities to deal with this agenda. We have a methodology that we've tested out and that's being refined and rolled out in other cities called City Strength. But we're also in partnership with other actors outside the bank because, in fact, there are almost a dozen methodologies on urban resilience, if you can believe that. And we have a navigation tool to advise clients on how to pick and choose between them. And then there's specific work on looking at that housing stock that's yet to come and how you build in resilience in structures in the future. And then, of course, we've got sources like finance like PPCR, that we need to increasingly draw on. And in talking to Kantan before the DBL started, she said, yeah, why not? If cities can access bank financing with a sovereign guarantee, they should be able to access PPCR financing as well. So to conclude, the takeaways, we clearly are committed to this agenda and think it should be scaled up, that we should be doing much more in terms of both lending and technical assistance on urban resilience. And here's where the resolution of the problem might come in. We should start by focusing on what we know best. We know climate resilience, we know disaster risk management. Let's start there. And I think by resolving problems in those areas, we will find that we're also helping to resolve some, not all, of the other types of urban risks that were mentioned at the beginning of the presentation. So what do we propose to do in the short term? We want to put together a manifesto. We have, maybe that's better than calling it a flagship. Call it a manifesto. That would be about investing in urban resilience to strengthen the ability of cities and the urban poor to cope with shocks and stresses. We want to roll out and scale up this methodology to provide technical assistance and awareness to cities. We'd like to have a program of technical assistance, even maybe a project preparation facility that helps us to reach out to 50 cities around the world to promote this agenda. We'll be starting a program to roll out the building regulation work, and clearly we want to expand lending in this area. And we have roles and responsibilities, and one of them is external partnerships. Now, we're partners with the IDB in something called the Medellin Collaboration for Urban Resilience, and that involves the Rockefeller Foundation, the C40, the Compact of Mayors, ICLEI, and a number of UN agencies. So we have a platform where we can work with international partners, thinking this agenda through and coming up with as sensible as possible division of labor so that we move this agenda forward. And then I have the 20 annex slides that we now will go through. No, just kidding. So since I have 30 seconds left, I'll stop there.
Thanks.
Great. Thanks, Joe. We'll take two questions. I just want to, there are a couple other things I wanted to flag as part of this. One is some of the risk screening tools that were developed over the last several years also contribute to this type of work, and we could be weaving those into this conversation as well. Gustavo, at some point I hope you'll chime in and talk about the launch of the global platform in Singapore next month. For those of you who are not aware, there's a Jeff-funded program known as the Sustainable Cities Integrated Assistance Pilot, which the bank is taking the lead on in collaboration with a number of other implementing partners, other MDBs and UN agencies. And that's broadly looking at urban sustainability, but as part of the services that are available to the participating cities, there will be information and support services available on issues associated with urban resilience. And using that platform to build out relationships, reaching out to the MCUR group, reaching out to some of the other initiatives within each of these different partner institutions is a very fundamental part of that. So I hope you'll chime in on that. But we have time for about 2 clarifying questions, and then we'll move on to the next speaker. Anybody have anything burning that you'd like to follow up on? I'll
respond to your question, maybe. So last weekend, I was able to meet with Shuiman Wang, who's heading up the global program on sustainable cities, and we agreed to co-sponsor the manifesto, or the flagship paper, on urban resilience, but also to look at the 24 cities in the GPSC as sources of information, as partners, as reviewers of the work as well. So we clearly want to use that. We want to use the work that you've been leading on finance for resilience. There's so much going on in this organization that we need to bring in, and I think it's a great opportunity to have a solid foundation, not to mention the stuff that's going on outside as well.
Great. Any other comments, or why don't we just move on to Horacio? Okay. So, thank you, Joe.
Thank you. Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Okay. Thank you, Steven, Kanta, and Niels for having me here and inviting me today. It's nice to be back here for this presentation. I also have just 12 minutes, so I'm going to try to rush. What I said is that the presentation is going to be dynamic. That is the perfect word for this. Let's hope that I can make it in 12 days. Because, sorry. So cities, I mean, we already know, I mean, why a city is so important for the region, in particular for Latin America, but this applies to the rest of the world. They are the economic growth of our country, the hubs of innovation, promote entrepreneurial spirit, and main employment generators. Latin America is one of the most urbanized regions in the world. It is 82% urbanized today. It's going to be 84 in 2050. But what we found is that the intermediate cities of Latin America are growing faster than the average of the country and faster than the biggest cities of their own countries. Growing faster than Sao Paulo, than Buenos Aires, than Bogota, etc. So there was a huge concern. But the main one is how the cities are growing, and they're growing like this, with this level of fragmentation. This is Caracas. Or they are growing with this level of density. This is Cochabamba. And 82% of the population live in coastal areas with heavily impacted by natural disasters and climate change. This is the last flooding in La Plata in Argentina 2 years ago. And the economic losses from natural disasters have kept growing in the last decades. And we have the most traditional problems that cities are facing. I mean, less than 50% of the wastewater is treated, 32% of the population in Latin America live in informal settlements, and we are the most dangerous and violent region of the world. I mean, we have 25 homicides per 100,000 inhabitants. 41 cities of the most dangerous 50 cities in the world are in Latin America. So that is also making the problem more complex. So what the bank decided is to create this initiative that will be focused on cities and this type of cities, intermediate cities, between 100,000 and 2 million, and those that were growing economically and demographically above the average. We developed a methodology, and I'm going to tell you a little bit about that, that was based on 3 pillars: the environmental and sustainability pillar, the urban one, the urban sustainability, and the fiscal and governance. And now we are creating this 4th, which is competitivity, and it's going to start in the next round of cities in this year, 2016. The methodology itself to be applied takes about a year, and this has a diagnostic phase, prioritization, and action plan. I'm going to give more details about it. And then it has a second phase, which is more the financing of the pre-investment, the monitoring itself, and trying to identify investment for the operations identified during the process. What we do first is we take a picture of the city. We have about between 120 and 140 indicators that we apply to every city, and a stop lighting system in which we analyze how they are doing in different sectors. And we bring a team of about 10 people, 10 specialists from the bank, working in the representation of each country to the city. And we request the city to set up this multidisciplinary team as well. And we decide with them and we discuss the situation of the indicators and the sectors. And we decide which the final color of the sector is going to be. So of course, if you're red, I mean, you know, you're really have to be really concerned. There's a lot of room for improvement in the yellow, and you have few greens there that apparently you don't need to be that concerned. And we complement this picture with something that is more complicated and more sophisticated, which are these baseline studies. One is the inventory of greenhouse emissions that for Latin America, I don't think that is that relevant, but you know, it's important. And the other 2 that are really key. One is the urban footprint development, how the city is growing, and the disaster risk and climate change vulnerability reduction analysis. And I'm going to go that in detail a little bit down the presentation. So when we have all this, when we analyze and have this clear diagnostic of the city, which is going to be the topic that is more crucial for the city, which is the one that it has to take first. If you have only, I don't know, $10, where are you going to put them? So we develop these 4 criteria of prioritization. We ask the people what they think about. I mean, which are the topics that are affecting them the most. We analyze the economic cost of each of the sectors being the way they are today for the city, which is the economic cost for the city. The climate change filter, so this means how adaptable are these topics, how impacted are these topics to climate change, and the technical criteria. So after that, this is just a picture of the results of the survey that we do in the city. And we come up with this action plan. We have identified these 2, 3, 4 topics that are key for the city, and we put them together in the action plan. The action plan identifies the budget for that, a chronological whose responsibility, when that is going to be done and finished. This is the case of Mar del Plata, just for the sake of example. These were 3 of the main topics, and here we were able to combine what we found as really a priority for the city with funding that we already have at national level. We have a program at national level for sewage and a program for waste collection. So what we did is we brought the mayor to the unit. In this case, with the IDB, but we did the same thing with CAF. We did the same thing with the World Bank in other countries, and we just brought them together. And you know, there is a need of lending from the unit, institution unit, and there is a need for the city. So these guys, Mar del Plata got $79 million for the collection and sewage system. And in collaboration, because we work with academic institutions, and I'm going to talk about that later, we devised a new urban intervention, multi-sector urban intervention, and now they are building the new civic center for the city designed by ETH, the Swiss institution. But something that we try to do in every city is not to work on sectoral basis. We have this multi-sectoral team, and we request the same thing from the city. We work on territorial basis, and we try to focus and put specialists to work together in just one project. And you can imagine how difficult that is to do it in this kind of institutions and at municipal level. I'm going to talk about that and give an example. And then we got into pre-investment. I mean, this could be, you know, environmental studies, engineering, pre-feasibility, economic studies, whatever is needed to take it to financial closure and to have the bidding documents ready for implementation. Just some examples. We have done the mobility plan for Cochabamba in Bolivia, the whole solid waste management project in Montego Bay. The phase 5 has to do with the monitoring system, and here we are not reinventing the wheel. We are working with Bogotá Como Vamos. This is a system where we put together civil society, private sector, and the academy with the municipality to work together, establish objectives and indicators to measure how they're going to reach those indicators and how they are doing and when. This worked very well in Bogota. Now there is a network of this type of organizations in Latin America, in many countries. So we partnered with them in every city, and where the institution doesn't exist, we create the new organization. An investment, as I said, example of Mar del Plata, I mean, the best case scenario is we have already a national program or some other institutions has it, we put them together, and if it is in need, I mean, we can develop, of course, a new operation, and we're happy to do it. So far, we have mobilized about $2.3 billion. This is money from the IDB, money from the local development banks, and from the private sector. But this part of the local development banks, I think, is the most success story of the successful result of the initiative that became a regional public good. We found these partners in different countries that they said, we like the initiative, we're going to copy the model, we want to finance it with our own money, and we want the bank to help us in the supervision and implementation. So Findeteri in Colombia did it for 9 cities. In Brazil, we have done it in 5 cities, in Argentina for 10 cities, 5 in Chile, etc. On all these financed by local institutions. We have done 52 cities in total, 26 financed by the bank, 24 by local funding, and these are the institutions that are working with us. They are interested in working in Latin America, so we bring them to the field. They spend, in some cases, 1-2 months working with the city, and we come up with a new project that we include in the action plan. The vision for 2020 is 120 cities. This is where we would like to reach. And let me tell you a little bit more about the baseline studies that have to do with resilience and the topic that we are talking about today. Of course, we work with both type of hazards, rapid onset and slow onset, but we focus generally per city on 3 hazards. And in general, they have to do with rapid onset is the general choice. We calculate the risk. I'm not going to stop on this because you guys know about it already. But this is an important thing. In every city, and this is the case of Tegucigalpa in Honduras, in every city, we model the flooding situation. This is one of the most common hazards that we find in every single city. So we model the situation with different recurrent periods, and let me see if we can see this. Well, what I wanted to say here is, I mean, we have the model, we can run it, well, now it's running, and we run the model in every city for different recurrent periods, and we even validate this with previous storms, and we did this in Tegucigalpa for Agatha, and really we do it with LiDAR and in a very, very high resolution level, so it's very, very extremely precise, and this is the main result of the exercise in Tegucigalpa. And we did the same thing in Jalapa, of course, and we did it in every city. But we also check the rest of the limitations that the city has for expansion and the other hazards, right? So we map all of them, and this is the most interesting thing. We put that map together with this one, which analyzes how the city has been growing, how it was 20 years ago, how it is today, how it's going to be in 20 years. And we model 2 scenarios. One is a smart, and one is a trend scenario, how the city is going to keep growing according to the land consumption and the same patterns that has been following in the last years. So for Mar del Plata in Argentina, this was the case for the trend scenario, the initial growth. The cost of the infrastructure to feed the new city is going to be about $565 million. But if we do it with more density, with a smart, occupying the empty spaces within the city, it's only $146 million. And the mayors are not aware about this. I mean, they are just concerned about the day-to-day and how to deal with the real estate. But nobody's thinking about the cost. So we put those maps together, and we tell the city, well, you perfectly know now where to grow. And when you ask them about these master plans that they are developing, in generally, the city doesn't have a clear idea why they are going to the east or to the west. And generally, they're have to do more with the real estate than with the real, good places to grow. And just to have a picture of the situation in terms of risk in Latin America, only 15% of the cities that we work with have risk maps, right? And only 30% know what to do in case of a natural disaster. 70% of the cities, they don't know what to do. If something happens, no plan. And this is just to understand where people are seeing the problem. This is the result of the survey, which are the main topics for the people, for the public opinion. In the case of our cities, the intermediate cities, Climate change is number 11, and 13, vulnerability is number 13. In case of the mega cities, those are 5 mega cities: Sao Paulo, Buenos Aires, Lima, Mexico City, and Bogota. I mean, climate change is, it's number 8. I mean, it's pretty good. I think the awareness is there. It's definitely there. And for all of them, we calculate the loss expectancy and the most probable loss in 100 years, etc. But how to increase the resilience? And this was an example of Tegucigalpa. We really believe in multisectorality to work with. And here we are working with 5 different divisions of the bank. The people of transport is working there, natural resources, water and sanitation, security, social security, citizen security, and the urban group. All of them working on territorial basis, trying to fix the problem of the river that was destroyed during the Mitch storm, and also on the urban aspects and security, how to revive the whole city that has been destroyed and nobody went back downtown. And they are losing population. So there is a whole project, and maybe this is something that we can talk about. This is the real cooperation that I would like to see. There is very little fiscal space for Honduras to get into and work on this project. So this is a real collaboration. We can put money together here on alone and solve the big problem. Because I love those platforms where, Rockefeller is and everybody is, but you do feel that the things are happening there. So maybe this is something that we can do together and fix the city. So conclusions, there is no lack of awareness. I think that the main problem is the lack of action and awareness of the economic impact. Nobody understands what is economically behind this. The prudent urban planning goes a long way in building resilience. This is absolutely true. We need to think where we're going to build first, and without technical elements, it's impossible to determine that. Work multisectorality, with multisectoral cooperation, and the importance of quantifying the incremental infrastructure cost, right? Why building on vulnerable areas? Nobody thinks about that. And again, I think that this is a fantastic opportunity to help our local development banks to understand where to put their money. Findeter, Caixa Económica, they are working with us, not only because they like the tool, it's because they have to finance their own cities and they don't know what the priorities are. They received the mayor of the city saying, okay, this is my project, 2 pages, here it is. This is an idea, this is not a project. So what they need to know is which projects do you have, what are your problems, we want to focus on the first one, and then we move on. So this is it. Thank you very much.
Niels, because there's a lot that we can talk about. This is a very distinctive operating model, different in many ways than some of the things that we do, similar in some ways. Were you going to kind of just use these as fodder for your conversation, or should we have a little conversation about that first?
Any way you want. I'll adjust to your pace.
Why don't we let you go first, and then we'll just have a longer, fully open conversation.
So, if you can briefly introduce for our WebEx.
Sure, I apologize. Yes, okay, so this is Niels Holm Nielsen, who's our global lead for resilience and disaster risk management. He's based within the GSER team. He's been leading on DRM issues in different regions, in particular in Latin America, for several years now. So it'll actually be a very interesting, I think, conversation about kind of the trends that we've been seeing and how this overlaps or is distinctive from what IDB is trying to do with the ESG initiative.
Yeah, so I was trying to figure out what can I say that makes some kind of sense in 4 minutes in this kind of topic, and it's not simple, so bear with me. But to me, it's well, I love seeing Horacio's presentation. I've seen it a couple of times, and he always impresses me. I once told my boss not too long ago that she should hire him, otherwise she would be out of business. I don't know if she's working on it, but it's. But I mean, as Steve said, I also work in the LAC region, so Horacio is a partner and a competitor, and I do admire what IDB has done with this, and this is important for what I think the World Bank should be doing with urban resilience. Because the word complexity comes into my mind every 2 seconds when I think of what we should do it. And to me, it's an issue of, as you have seen in these 2 presentations, everything from defining the scope of it. you saw Joe's slide with those 30-plus different elements that in that slide denominates resilience or hazards, in fact. I don't agree they do, but nevertheless, I do agree there's a pretty big question on complexity related to it. In the urban space, of course, everything development comes together in a confined geographical space, and just that brings in complexity, and then all the institutional complexities around it. So as an institution, as the World Bank, if we want to be relevant on that agenda, we need to figure out to handle complexity in a way that we simply haven't done before. And that's not an easy ask. And why I'm so impressed with Horacio's presentation and the work IDB has done on this is that maybe they haven't solved all the issues, but they have definitely done something really clever to handle a multi-sectoral approach to deal with this complexity that I think we could learn from and maybe copy most of it and then try to do it 10% better. So that means we have two sides here. We have the client, which is the city and maybe a national government involved in somehow, and then we have the bank side. And on both sides, we need to be able to handle that complexity. So to me, being relevant in this agenda is figuring out how do we keep the conversation at the mayor level for the next decade. How do we keep that conversation with the mayor for a decade about urban resilience? Because what typically happens in a bank fashion is that we start with the mayor, we get 30 minutes, and then we send down to the line ministry. And then we have a project with the line ministry. And that may, I don't know where you guys' approach is heading, and maybe you're not far enough in to start to evaluate on this, but you may end up in that trouble unless you can continue to keep it broad, right? And so how do you keep that conversation at that level for 10 years when there's an election in between? We have never done that. So that's a pretty big question. But I think that's what it takes, because we cannot, in any of the cities we're dealing with, aspire to have a measurable impact on resilience unless we have an appetite for 10 years. That immediately introduces a second problem for us. We never have the appetite for 10 years in this institution. So we also need to overcome some internal disincentives to make this work. Now, while I still think it might be possible, is that the price is big. It's really, really big. We don't, even if we focus on the million-plus people cities, 10 years from now, that's 3 billion people in the world global south. If we want to be serious about reducing poverty at a global level, we got to figure out how to be relevant in that space. Otherwise, we'll never achieve the twin goals. To me, it's that simple. It's that kind of agenda. It's a 3 billion people kind of agenda. So that price may enable us as an institution to come at the problem in a much different way than we have been able to come at any other problem before this. That involves money. And anyone who's interested in this space, you might as well start to talk to your bosses about money, because without money, this is not going to go anywhere. And that is not only your BB for whatever it is you need to do, which is ever disappearing, it's money on the financing side. We need to figure out how to make our 100 million that goes into a loan program with a city bring with it another 1 billion to that same city from other sources. And from time to time, those other sources may be your friends at the IDB or the ADB or whatever bank it is in your region. But increasingly, we need to figure out how do we strengthen some of those technical and governance systems in the city that enables that city to tap into private capital. There's lots of private capital who would love to finance stuff in cities, of course, at a price. That's how private capital works. But we got so many of the tools to help hedge some of the non-climate related risks associated to that, and Steve has been leading some of these programs around this. But to me, we don't get into the technical elements of climate resilience in the city space without figuring out how to address that. And so, again, this brings us back to the appetite, because we can't handle city governance in a 1-year program, a 2-year TA program. It just will never happen. So, again, we need to be in that 10-year mindset. So it's just to add more complexity to what these two gentlemen showed in a much more eloquent way, but I do believe, to round up, that this agenda is certainly not going to go away. Whether or not World Bank, I love when we have meetings with the IDB and everybody refers to themselves as the bank, but whether or not the World Bank is involved in it, that's a question to be had still, I suppose, but the cities will figure out how to move this, and other partners out there will for sure figure out how to move this. And I hope that those of you who are really keen on this area, you will help push our institution to be involved in a big way as well.
Great. Thank you very much. There are a couple issues that arose for me out of this, and part of it comes from the hat I wear and the hat that the PPCR program necessarily wears, that it's focused on climate resilience. And we're now a month and a half beyond the Paris Agreement. And things have changed in innumerable ways because of that. And there are now global processes in place that are focusing on, and this was part of the run-up to Paris, which is this conversation about the rallying of $100 billion in resources that can serve the climate-related needs of countries around the world, developing countries around the world, and where did that money come from? How was it used? And there will be exercises led by the UN, led by other institutions over the next several years to try and refine this discussion about what qualifies as climate finance. And different funds, the CIF, which is the parent, the Climate Investment Funds, which is the parent of the PPCR, the new Green Climate Fund, which is still trying to find its feet, but has committed, you know, in an informal board meeting last week, that the board committed or recommitted themselves to delivering $2.5 billion in climate finance to countries around the world and by the end of this calendar year. At the same time, the GEF, you know, had a very prominent place in the Paris Agreement as a resource that countries can go to, cities can potentially go to. But the thing that we keep coming back to with all those things is that it's climate. It's a climate fund. It's a climate agreement. And the NDCs, the nationally determined contributions, the INDCs that are now known as NDCs, have articulated the climate priorities of countries. And yet, in the midst of all of this, there is greater attention on a broader notion of resilience that goes beyond climate adaptation. And we just heard several presentations about the need for this broader interpretation. So just to, first question I want to put on the table to go back to the speakers is, how do you square that circle? How do you capitalize on the opportunities that are being presented by Paris, by the monies that are being rallied for climate-related investment? How do you fit this larger agenda into that type of operating environment?
Go ahead. Well, I tried to conclude by saying, you know, that's where we start. So we take the climate finance and we put together activities that help cities address some of their biggest climate threats. But we do that in a way that also takes on some of the other risks. And just a simple example, a city affected by flooding, it should have an operations center to be able to mobilize and respond when floods occur. But that operations center is going to be used for other things as well. When there's a strike that disrupts transit, or when there's a major fire in the city, it gets used for that as well. So I think we start with our strengths and sources of finance, but we use the approaches to solve other problems at the same time.
Is that how IDB is thinking about it?
Yeah, well, my take is that all these traditional sources of financing, let me say something first. I think that has changed since the period that I was here working in climate change. I think there is much more awareness in general, and I think that the banks and the clients, and there is this willingness to cooperate more between institutions, but I feel that it's still very difficult to put them together to work just on one project. It's very hard to do it. And so that's what the willingness part, I think, is fine, and the political will is there, but it's very hard to take it to the ground. It's very hard to make it real, to make it happen. We are, from the initiative, we're working really, really hard on trying to cooperate and get funding from other sources and people concerned about the same project. But believe me, that is really, really hard. I find that I'm spending like 80% of my time trying to do that to get the money for this project, while I feel that that should be more, at least easier, at least done in the most systematic way. So for me, it's still a challenge. I see that the opportunity is there. It is clear. It's easier to some extent, but it's still very hard.
My take on that is that there's not enough money to go around, free money to go around, that it's not an academic exercise, right? So ideally, conceptually, and I come from the DRM background, so I would love good analysis to lead to good investments, and you understand everything about risk, and then you make a choice, and then you move. But it's just not going to work that way. The cities are going to be competing with the countries for the same free money. The countries are going to be competing with the bigger countries for the same free money. And the donors are going to be reaccounting the money they've already promised for something else, and they're going to put a different label on it, so it will turn out there's really not that much free money around. It's just a relabeling. And that's been going on for 10 years, and I see no signs that it will not continue to go on for the next 10 years. So if that, in fact, is a reasonable description of the world, then if I were the city or World Bank engaging with the city, I would work from where's the city, what are the issues, and can we, in the process of preparing something that makes sense for the city for its development over the next 10 years, find something that we can then opportunistically ship off to the Green Climate Fund and see if they will finance for free 20% on the margins. But we set ourselves up to do the investment with the city anyway because it makes sense, and then we hope we can, in the process, work in a lot of the climate resilience and the risk management concepts and make it just good enough that we might have a shot at competing for green climate money, which of course would make the whole package so much nicer. So that, some people think I'm cynic, but I think that's at least a practical approach, and I have seen that work in some contexts where I've worked myself or where colleagues have worked, and I think in general that's because otherwise we put in lots of transaction costs into processes where we don't control the final outcome. Right. We get to the end line, we don't get a project financed, we've lost a client, we've lost credibility, we've lost time, and we just wasted a lot of resources.
Well, that is exactly, I mean, Neil's statement is exactly what we are doing. I mean, with the Tegucigalpa project, we're moving forward.
I told you I like that approach.
And then we're moving forward. I mean, if they're going to jump on, I mean, that's great. I mean, but I'm spending a lot of time trying to convince and explain and everything. And it's so crystal clear. I mean, there's not much to think about it. So, and I would like also the World Bank to do the same thing. I mean, that's what I was saying. I mean, you know, we need the money to finish it up.
Margaret, you had a question you wanted to say?
I wanted to just touch on a couple of points because I found, I liked both presentations were great, but I found them a bit lacking on the social side. And I think that gets to your point a little bit, Steve, about this going beyond adaptation. It's interesting that, Horacio, the survey you presented, the number 1 and number 2 were security and transparency, and climate change was down lower.
Yeah.
And if Shockwaves taught us anything, I mean, it concluded that the distributional impacts, if we're going to get to Joe's point about focus on the urban poor, it's going to be about accountability, governance, and getting the voice of the poor in these processes. Climate change is taking place in fragile settings. By 2030, 90% of people living under $2 a day will be in fragile settings. So this whole, we're not going to be able to pull this all apart and just say it's climate. You know, I understand, yeah, we're working with starting with what we know, but we know quite a lot about the conflict and violence work and social dimensions. It just doesn't fit in climate and DRM. So we need to have better ways of working internally and across our organizations on this complex issue because it's extremely complex. And the social stuff may not be the big ticket items, but it's going to be the stuff that makes this other stuff work or not.
Yeah, let me add something to that. I mean, because it's very interesting what you are saying. Absolutely. I mean, the first topics are those. And there's something even more interesting in that survey. Social citizen security is number 1, and education is 18. Mm-hmm. Nobody's making the link between those two problems. Yeah. But I just spent the last 4 years at the bank trying to convince the social people, because what happened when we started, we were saying, okay, the priority topics are going to receive funding, some funding that we had for the pre-investment. So, of course, at the very beginning, when you put everything together, the social issues always arrive, you know, 4, 5, 6, something like that. And it's never the first one. So at the beginning, they never received the money. So I was trying to convince them that the important thing is not to receive those $200,000. The important thing is that we are opening a new window of dialogue with the mayors. And we are opening a new dialogue, and we are working together in the same place. And that is completely different how the logic of the bank used to work. But literally, it took me 4 years for them to understand, because they are still complaining that they are not getting the money for privatization. But some others, governance, they understood. I mean, the important thing is not those $200,000. The important thing is that we have a new dialogue with these people. This mayor is going to be president next year. There's a whole dynamic with the mayors and the national government that changed a lot in the last 10 years, I feel. And the mayors, what you were saying is at the very beginning, if we establish a better relationship with the mayors, I think we have a much better contact with the people and with social aspects itself. So,
Roger.
Thanks, Ed. I thought these presentations were great, and you just mentioned the mayor, and that reminded me of something that I wanted to ask about. I think Margaret's point is really well taken, though, in terms of the social aspect. You had this nice graph, these 3 graphs of environment, technology, and then social. And then you said in climate change, it affects the environment. And I think, really, no, climate change is going to really affect all of those in many ways, kind of vastly explode the uncertainty associated with a lot of those types of things. But you ended your presentation talking about planning, and kind of you had this little thing where you said, really planning, urban planning is this great thing for resilience, reducing vulnerability. And I think there's a lot of, I wanted to kind of get a sense of how the IDP is dealing with some real, the complexities around planning that might hit. Number one, you mentioned talking to a mayor. And in fact, when you're talking about long-term planning for 10, 20 years, most of where the people are coming in and going to vulnerable places or beyond where that mayor has any sort of impact, because it's happening beyond the boundaries. And how are you addressing that in the program? Does that mean necessarily going to the national levels? And also, really, where the rubber hits the road on planning isn't so much the planning, it's the implementation of a plan once you have it. Having the development control, having the mechanisms to implement it. So to what extent are you also focusing on that as the question of resilience? And we haven't talked about mitigation, but planning is also important for mitigation. But it's a mitigation and resilience issue. And I'd be interested in hearing the IDP conclusion.
Well, of course, we cannot solve all the problems, but something very important that happened along the way with the cities is the following. In most of the cities that we arrived, they are working already on the master plan of the city. The master plan of the city. And they told, well, you have to include it, you have to take it into consideration. Of course, we want to take everything into consideration. But the funny part of it is that the master plan, generally, when you talk to the architect that is in charge of it, said, oh, the city has to look to the mountain, it has to look to the sea, and it's going to develop and it's going to grow in this direction. Great, beautiful. Which technical support do you have to say that it's going to grow in that direction? Why? Why it's going to? I mean, I love the idea, the concept. On artistic basis, it's great, but on technical basis, why? No, you don't get it. We have been working here for 3 years, and this is where the city is going to grow. Okay, that's fine. So we take the input that they have. Generally, after a year, we finish, of course, our work before they are done with the master plan. They request our information for the master plan, and in the end, what they do is they change the master plan on all these area that was supposed to grow to the west because the mountain was there and there was a need to connect the mountain with the sea, which is beautiful. Didn't make any sense. You couldn't put people there to live. So they changed that. So that was a very nice result of the initiative that we're not planning to have. I mean, we thought that the mayor, we're going to set some regulation, but this happened right on the spot. I mean, they were working on that and they changed that. Of course, I wouldn't say that happened in 100% of the cities, but I would say that 50% of the cities that we work with, we're working on a master plan. And the other thing I think is important about in terms of the different governments, what happened is that we started the project with one mayor, and he changed after when we were working on the pre-investment side. There was a change in office. The new mayor came in. We were concerned about, is this mayor going to continue with the same policies, with the same ideas? And all of them embrace the thing because they don't have a plan. They do it. And believe me that after 6 months, everybody thinks that the action plan is from that mayor, from the second one, not from the first one. Because, the guy was skilled enough to sell it as his own product.
comment on that?
Yeah. No one voted for it.
Just following up on that planning argument.
Sure. Yeah.
When Joe showed some numbers indicating that 60% of this, or maybe you did, but someone showed numbers on the 60% indicating that the cities will grow and they will add another 60% infrastructure. And so that, just on that number, that also tells us that if we somehow figure out to help cities get the planning part right, that's by far the cheapest way of working the resilience issue. Right. Of course, politically, it's by far the most complicated way, and nobody has solved it yet. And I was about to make this comment before you said it, and I was about to say it's because it's the fault of the architects. I know there's probably a handful of you guys in the room, so I don't mean it personally. But to me, it's an issue of, can we figure out to get the budget people in the city in charge of the city planning, so they start to look at some of those cost numbers that you guys are now generating for the cities, because then they think planning for, is it 125 million or 550 million in infrastructure investment over the next 10 years? The budget people are going to ask that question. The architect is not likely to ask that question. And you can start to look at, okay, if I generated development in these areas, does that do to my land value? So does that do anything to my income as a city? And that, of course, becomes, again, a budget question. So somewhere in this equation, we need to figure out how do we get those budget people in the city to be in charge of the city master plan. That's also, I think, the only way we ever get to work with the city master plan and gets implemented, because I don't think it's new to do city master plans. I think it would be new if there's a city in South America that implements it. Right. And so that, it's part of the same question, and it's got to be possible.
Right. Just a final point on this. There's a whole literature about the failure of master planning. And it's because it just doesn't get implemented, because there are other forces besides human logic that are at work in the way that cities grow. And that has to do with real estate dynamics. That has to do with where infrastructure and transport investments are made. It has to do with where people settle, and a whole range of factors that you can't influence by writing something down on a piece of paper and saying this is how it should be. So I think that we have to engage with those processes if we're really going to talk about resilience, and if we're going to affect that 60% of the cities that haven't been built.
Okay. Bernice, did you want to chime in? And we'll do yours.
Also, a couple of points I wanted to comment on. The first one was financing. Financing needs are huge, and I think, again, access to climate finance become a bit of a red herring for our clients. I mean, there's all this talk, big people's parents, and there's a sense that, oh, all this money is out there. Well, frankly, it's not out there. It's certainly not out there right now, and you don't know how much is going to be out there in the next few years, and it's even harder for subnationals to access this funding. So it's really a bit of a red herring. So I think having very much real what has worked in South Asia very well. I mean, you do your, work with your planning department, your finance department, do your annual expected losses, show what your, the fiscal cost is going to be over the next decade in terms of not investing in resilience, and start making it part of their regular budget allocation so that it becomes, rather than some external, funding that may be out there, actually make it part of their regular, investment planning. As other people should be doing, or state level government or national level government. So that has worked quite successfully. So that's one on the financing side. Secondly, I think sometimes you overthink it too. If you have a good project which shows good results, additional financing tends to come. So we have a few projects on resilience, on urban resilience in South Asia, where we're now getting the ADB to co-finance or parallel finance. We're getting JICA to come in with finance. So our success tends to breed success. So again, maybe start small, but hopefully you'll have a phase 2, phase 3, and if you implement all, you show results that financing doesn't come. And then thirdly, I was going to say, just reflecting on the famous BURP project, the Bangladesh Urban Resilience Program. Sometimes I think we just overthink what do we mean by urban resilience, and we try and get the concept right before we start. And of course, we need to have a conceptual framework, but in practice, often it's something fairly simple that is your hook, is your entry point with your client. So in the case of Bangladesh, we've actually worked on a fairly substantial and expensive DODR-funded NLCA on seismic resilience, which was interesting, but wasn't really capturing the attention of the city or of the national government. Then they had a building collapse, right? The garment factory collapsed, just for no particular reason other than that it was badly built. And they realized the city was entirely unprepared for a disaster of this scale, which was one large building. There were thousands of people trapped in there. getting the fire trucks and the fire stations that they asked for. But really, this has been for us an entryway into what will be a much larger engagement, and we'll have a face to do and a face through, and already seeing co-financing from other institutions. So I guess my point here is don't overthink it sometimes. No, don't try and come in with this perfect concept of resilience, which covers everything from climate change, natural disasters to conflict and economic resilience. Just see where your entry point is and then build on that.
Yeah, thank you. I just wanted to come back to Horacio's presentation and, you know, coming back to the concept of this DRM and CCA, because you had this hazard and you said that you do pay attention to those, right? I'm just curious, in the cities where you've done that, it will be very illuminating to understand, you know, exactly sort of what is it that you're doing differently in the city, or, you know, does it really add a humongous cost to anything that you do additional to what you would have done? I know you said you looked more at the rapid answer, but I'm just curious, in terms of your methodology, what is that planning horizon? I think you mentioned 2030, but I'm just curious what time frame you're using for that, because that would be where you would bring in some of the longer term climate considerations. The second thing I just wanted to finish is you said you take a multi-sectoral approach. I think that's good. But I'm just curious in terms of, because the cities are fusing with the larger landscape, to what extent do you also sort of take the city to landscape approach? We often hear of this ridge to reef approach, you know, in terms of the whole watershed, but I'm just curious how far the cities are more flexible in the geographic, you know, spatial. I know it's very much driven by the mayor, but I think in terms of the narrative. Now, the reason I actually raised this is I think because you also mentioned, and I think even Joe, that the planning dimensions are key. And the reason I think we were trying to have this conversation was that in the context of at least some of the PPCR countries, where they are planning, putting their strategic planning frameworks, in the first round, nobody paid attention to the urban landscape. Now it's interesting that half of the countries, even in their own expression of interest and in the sort of conversations we've had, they want us to pay attention to the urban narrative. So how do we help them to frame it into that narrative and the planning conversation so that it becomes part of the way they're going to look at resilience, and maybe making it easier for your city construction around it? But I just wanted to learn a little bit from the IDB experience and what we can draw out from it.
Yeah, let me start by the last question. In terms of flexibility, I think that is still there, but I think the main result of that, I don't know if you're going to see it right away, but is that the mayor, for the first time, he has a tool to argue with the real estate sector. Before, he has no tool to tell them it doesn't make any sense to go in this direction. This is the first time that he has something. And on the top of that, he has the IDB saying that. So for him, that is very important. It's very important to sit at the table and say, we're not going to move in this direction, we're not going to do it. So I think that is one of the most positive results that we have in that sense. Flexible, all of them show very flexible to do it, all of them. And for them, this is a learning experience. I mean, they're going through the whole process, and we had mayors that, you know, sit with us for 3-4 hours every day. Our missions are about 3-4 days per city, and he spends 3-4 hours in every mission, and he sits at the table and he discusses with his team. So that shows a lot of willingness to change and willingness to participate in the process. So my feeling is that. And in terms of the urban development of the city itself and how this resilience or aspects are taken into consideration, the project of Tegucigalpa, I always talk about it because this is like regenerating the whole city. The city is dead. I mean, the heart of the city is dead. This is the commercial downtown and historical downtown. And that is losing people every year. About 10,000 people every year leave downtown. So what we are trying to say is this is not only a resilience project because I am protecting you for the next storm. I am getting back the very essence of this city. And this is what, you know, they say, okay, I love your pipes. I mean, that is great, but we need the park. We need the linear park on the top of it. Yeah, no, of course we want to do that. That is the essence of it, because we want the people to come down and enjoy it. And the people that are going to come down and enjoy it is not, the high-income people. These are going to be people living in the moros close by that are going to spend the weekend there sitting by the river. So I think that's a perfect match. I think that the situation is perfectly there, and the mayors are more than willing to accept this. I can't remember the first question.
Well, just wondering about the incrementality of any plan that you propose to the city based on looking at the
incrementality to the bank or to the
to the local
to the local.
Yeah.
Well, some of the projects that we work on are trying to be really very quick wins, right? I mean, very easy. That is not that they can use part of the budget that they have for that, and this has to do a lot with workability. That is kind of our main thing, our motto. We try to create more space and democratize the public space. So that is very little money. In terms of the big projects, of course we need somebody to come in and yeah, this is a heavy burden for them. But what we try to do is, as I said at the very beginning, we literally take the mayor to the national government and we organize the meetings, and in some cases they came out not just with the project that we were thinking about, but, we put them together with the education person who was not priority there, and they came up with a new school. So yeah, there is a burden. This is a long-term view, and we try to commit. Now what we want to do in Dominican Republic, in Santiago de los Caballeros, is put together the 4 candidates, for instance, and to make sure that all of them are going to adopt the results of the plan for the next 6 years.
Okay, Joshua, and then we've got one question from online, and then we'll go to you in the back.
Thank you. Niels and Berenice said everything very close to my heart, so thank you. I can now try to add something to exactly their line of thinking. There is an element of, I find, and this is all self-criticism, self-referenced in what I hear here, and it's 70% of my job is exactly what you described. So this is the banks, and these are our products, and let us give you a framework that looks even bigger, and let us pull in all the different sides, and here it is, the perfect world. Why don't we start actually suggesting things that we do not even do at the bank? Sub-sovereign financing. We don't do it, but unfortunately, if we cannot even suggest that it should exist somewhere, even if we cannot do it, then I'm not sure we're actually solving anything. Creditworthiness, which is the other side of sub-sovereign financing. Are we doing anything about it? I don't know. I fear not. And not as a side thought, not as part of the governance and wouldn't it be nice to also have a footnote on this. No, it should be part of the planning, but not at the master plan, at the regional planning stage, at the capital investment planning, at the yearly budgeting cycle, like Berenice was saying. This is where the climate smart and the resilience and all of the other considerations should factor in. If we cannot make that happen, I think we're just showing how intelligent we are at the World Bank, how wonderful things we could do if we only had the money, but we don't have the money, and we're just waiting for the next Paris where we're going to say, sorry, development goals missed, we knew what we could have done, but we didn't even utter saying it because it's not what we can do, in fact.
Well, following up on that, I kind of agree with Joshua, but if one of you works in a unit that has influence over the recommendations to the board on the bank's climate strategy, that one person in the room could consider putting, why don't we consider sub-sovereign financing as an institution, as an important part of addressing the climate resilience question? That could be a big idea. The board may not like it, but if someone asks for a big idea, that's one right there. So I fully agree with that. I don't see why our institution wouldn't push in that direction. And in fact, as far as I know, IDA doesn't have any rules that says we can't do it. I mean, of course, there's a limited amount of IDA resources around, and we would assume the national government fights for it. But there's nothing legally against us doing sub-sovereign financing with IDA money without sovereign guarantee. That is only for IBRD we have that limitation. So we have, I think there's room to be had here. I don't know when it's going to happen.
It doesn't have to be us, right, Niels? It doesn't have to be us.
It doesn't have to be us, but we have, on that part, I don't know exactly where you're heading with that argument, because I agree, many cities in the world will have to find solutions for these kind of challenges without us. So that I'm fully with you. In fact, probably 80% of them will have to find solution without us. But since we are here, we work here, we got to figure out what part of the solution are we part of. So to me, as a World Banker, it does have to be us. And we got to figure out how can we pull the value of this institution in that direction. And as someone else mentioned, IFC has hedging tools, MIGA has hedging tools, the guarantee group does guarantees that leverage our financing. We have a bunch of other hedging abilities in our institution, so we probably can't address all the questions the city has financially speaking, but we do have technically and institutionally a role to play for a lot of them. We probably haven't figured out to put those skills in play at the same time in the same space. But that's another, maybe that's the second big idea. Look at that.
The meeting was valuable for those ideas on their own. Just so you know, I did put sub-sovereign lending on the table. No, and if Urban submits that as an idea, it would force the conversation. So, okay, all right, guys. Just wanted to make sure we're aligning these issues. So we had one comment submitted by an online colleague, and this is to Horacio. Yeah. Does the initiative adopt parallel or joint financing? And then a follow-up question, how do they finance the community participatory monitoring component? Who pays for this?
Okay. Yeah, we accept joint financing, of course. I mean, we're more than happy to do it. Generally, of course, I have to go and convince many sectors of the bank that, that are not very convinced about the idea. But the nature of the initiative is to work together, not only within the bank, but also outside. So, yeah, I mean, we're more than happy to do it. And the monitoring system is financed the first 2 years. We finance the operational cost of the monitoring system. Essentially, what we finance is another survey and another review of the indicators. I mean, they pick up the information again. We finance that for the first 2 years. But during those 2 years, there is a kind of compromise from the municipal side that the private sector is going to come in and start financing this person working on the monitoring unit. So far, we have 2 cities that are working like that the private sector is already financing. The others are still in the phase of being financed, and we'll see what happens.
Okay, great. We'll give you the last question, and then I'll wrap this up.
My question was more around the regulation and accountability side of things. I mean, context is important, and if you look at states like South Asia, and I'm sure the experience might be the same in Latin America, things like corruption play a big issue in how you issue land permits and land use, etc., the use of no development zones. Are there like success stories where these issues have also been kind of dealt with? And also the question of the role of private sector, because I mean, you can touch the public infrastructure by dealing with the government, but there are a lot of informal settlements and the private builders, coming up. What has been the negotiation or engagement on that side?
Yeah.
Anyway.
Well, the examples that are brought up are usually the exceptions to the rule, because I think the situation you described is what undermines good planning and land use in a lot of cities. So, you have the Curativas and the Singapores, but they're few and far between. So, as Margaret was saying, it does come down to governance if we're going to have a complete package that's effective. But I don't know. Do you have any in your
no, very little. But my take on this, my feeling is that the private sector in general in every city that we talk to, what they are claiming for is clear rules of the game. So they compete on this basis, like all this type of corruption techniques, because they feel that that is the way to do it. But if they have somebody saying, okay, this is the way we're going to go, and we're not, there are countries where this works very well, and Chile is an example. And I have an anecdote with this at the first meeting that I had in one of the cities of Chile. We were talking about permits, building permits and everything, and I said, well, what about the exceptions? And all the guys sitting there looked at me and said, what exceptions? And I said, no, hate of the building. No, what exception? I mean, you have the law, right? But the guy was not pretending. I mean, he was literally, he didn't understand what I was saying. And that is the rule in every single city, exception. So the private sector, what they say a lot is, you know, if we have clear rules of the game and everybody plays by those rules, we're more than happy to cooperate with this. So if you ask me about good examples, Chile it is. Institutionally, Chile works much better than the rest of the countries in Latin America. So it's not a problem, it's not a virtue of the city itself. I think it's a virtue of the whole system. But in the other cities, yeah, I have some that work a little bit better, but in general, that is all over the spread. Pessimistic, I'm sorry.
Okay, well, I'd like to thank everybody. It's time to wrap up. Just two things I wanted to inquire about. One is, for those of us online or here who are less familiar with the whole Emerging and Sustainable Cities Initiative, are there any example reports? I know that they're done for internal purposes and done for the benefit of your clients, but is there anything that folks might be able to see that would help them understand both the approach as well as what the outcomes are, what you actually find when you do these analyses?
Yeah, everything is public and it is in our website.
Okay.
The methodology, the annexes with the indicators, and all the action plans, everything is open to the public. So you can go to the IDB website and find the Emerging and Sustainable Cities there. It's easy to find it. In every sector has a, I mean, trying to show this multi-sectorality, every sector has a link to the initiative, so you can find the information there.
Great. Okay, thank you. And then, Niels, I know that you have a community of practice that you help lead on these issues. I know there are others that have overlapping responsibilities, but for folks who want to engage more systematically, participate in these kinds of conversations, how might they learn more about this, or what's what are you all doing?
Ways to, there's lots of stuff going on in the space internally in the bank, so I'm not the only entry point to access a lot of that exciting work. But a practical way is to talk to Joe, talk to me, talk to Mark Forn in South Asia, talk to Maria Angelica working in Africa, talk to Schurman who works in East Asia, and that's 5 conversations that give you probably 80% of what's going on in the space in the bank. So that's one way of doing it. We are not yet up and running with an internal, well-functioning, flashy knowledge management offer to you guys, but we are working on it. So hopefully that will be part of what we can offer in not too distant future.
Great. Okay. Thank you again. The next session in this PPCR series will be focused on climate resilience and climate services. So we hope we'll see you there in, is it in 2 weeks, or do we have a calendar yet? So we'll come back and you'll hear from us. So thank you again, everybody. Thank you all our We'll go buy on lunch right now.
Yeah, next time. That's the first time I'm going to have it. Does it include
Your presentation, recording.
Thanks a lot for coming.